Speaker, I think any nation after 6 months would have difficulty in holding matters together in respect of the draconian measures to which we've all been subjected. I don't think there's anything particularly surprising about that. But of course the aggravation is quite distinct in this part of the United Kingdom as to why it is difficult now to hold things together. I think there are three reasons. The first has been touched upon today, and put very simply, once more, yesterday, we had a lawgiver giving out the law who's a lawbreaker. Dress it up, duck and dive as much as you like, but that is the inescapable reality. That when Michelle O'Neill stands behind any podium, particularly upstairs, and pontificates about what needs to be done and what regulations are going to be made, she utterly lacks any credibility. And it's not just she that suffers the lack of credibility, but in consequence, the regulations that she makes suffers a lack of credibility because she is the lawgiver. And of course, we all know that Michelle O'Neill has no apology to make for breaking the regulations. She has had ample opportunity. No later than 2 occasions, I presented her with the opportunity yesterday in this House to apologise for breaking the law. But no, she has a higher loyalty to something much more nefarious than that. And so that is the first fundamental underminer in respect of these regulations. And it is not going away. Sinn Féin may wish it away, they may try to talk it away, but it is not going away. It is the abiding issue when it comes to the saleability and the credibility of these regulations, that she who made them didn't keep them. Unless and until that issue is addressed, then regulations from that source will never carry any credibility. And I pity the Health Minister in those circumstances, because he is doing his best, but he's doing the best with an executive which has undermined him through the Deputy First Minister from those early days. And no matter with what diligence and sincerity the Health Minister might seek to portray his message, and I don't agree with it all, by the way, but no matter with what sincerity he seeks to convey it, much of it is washed away by the actions of a Deputy First Minister who gets in her official car, whose junior minister gets in his official car, whose finance minister gets in his official car, whose community minister gets in her official car, and all, at public expense, travel to a funeral where the law is to be flouted. And then we're surprised that there's a leakage in public confidence, that there's slippage in adherence to the very regulations made from that source. That is the first remediable reason, but as yet unremedied reason, why any regulations emanating on COVID are fundamentally undermined. The second reason that those regulations or undermined is the inherent absurdity that lies within some of them. We had an example again last night that you cannot go to your children's houses, to your parents' houses, but you can go to a pub. You cannot meet with those you can trust as to how they conduct themselves, but you can meet in a wet pub with 100 people you know nothing about. That is so inherently absurd that it undermines the message. And of course, listening to the Deputy First Minister this morning, for what it's worth, she seemed to be telling us that students who party all week in the Holy Lands can go back home at the weekends. They can live in the family home over the weekend, but the grandparents of that family home, who keep themselves to themselves, who are no risk to anyone, they can't go to the same home. If the Deputy First Minister is right in her interpretation of the regulations it seems she drafted, then that is equally absurd. And it is the absurdity of those aspects of the regulations which is undermining their credibility. And the third thing, which I think is undermining the stickability of these regulations, is whether or not there is the necessary proportionality between the regulations and the reality of the disease. Surely the proportionality for the restrictions that you bring in should be proportionate to the number of deaths and the number of hospital admissions, not to the number of cases. Happily, there are many people who, not happy that they're contracting COVID, but happy that it's not overly affecting them. There are many, many cases, but there are very few, relatively speaking, hospital admissions, and happily, even less deaths. Should the proportionality not be between the number of deaths, the number of people in our hospitals, remembering initially restrictions were to protect our health service, should the proportionality not be between the number of deaths and hospital admissions and the severity of restrictions, instead of the severity of the restrictions being with the number of cases? And that brings us to the issue, when we hear all the statistics promulgated, and we're told, oh, in so many weeks there'll be so many cases. Are we getting the worst case scenario again? Remember, we got the worst case scenario 6 months ago, 15,000 dead. We were never told what the best case scenario was. And to date, we've worked out much closer to it than to the worst. Are we again getting the worst case scenario with concealment of the best case scenario? Because I'm not sure you can do that twice and hold public credibility. So I do think there has to be a particular focus on two things. I think those who are evidently vulnerable need that ring of steel of protection, and those who flagrantly breach the law need to find no mercy. But the fundamental at the end of this is, in a society threatened, as we undoubtedly are, there has to be a bounden, compelling personal responsibility on every citizen. Every citizen is capable of catching the virus. Therefore, every citizen must take their own defences. And of course, those who don't threaten everyone. But I do think the Minister has an uphill battle, and it's an uphill battle of a homegrown variety within this executive. Homegrown by the Deputy First Minister and homegrown with muddling regulations. Thank you.
Sir Jerry Carroll, Hunt Cash. I call Jerry Carroll.